do with it, and we wouldn't want to. If you handed it to us on a silver platter, we want nothing to do with it.
Even if it was on a silver platter, there you go. Words from the leader of the free world. Let's now dissect those comments a bit more and think about the impact of the timing of this trip with Paul Harrison, Downing Street press secretary under Theresa May from 2017 to 2019. Freddy Gray, editor of the Spectator USA. Welcome to both of you. If I come to you, Paul, first, in terms of the timing of this, if you were still in Downing Street, how would you be handling this?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that the timing isn't ideal. We're in the midst of an election campaign and we have a very important multilateral summit that's going on at the same time. Of course, the summit has been in the diary and organised for a very long time, and it isn't movable. You know, these things happen once a year.
Well, the clue's in the title of a snap general election. No one knew it was coming.
Exactly right. So, you know, there's nothing that can be done about actually changing the time, but let's face it, Number 10 and the campaign will be nervous, and they'll be, I think, relieved when the wheels of Air Force One go up in a couple of days' time.
Why will they be nervous? What could be bad about Donald Trump and Boris Johnson?
The truth is that the president, and this is something that his supporters love, by the way, is an unpredictable character. You know, he dispenses opinions with veracity and force where he does so, and, you know, that can have a big impact. And you know, so people will just be a little bit nervous about things that he might say or do while he's here. I think it's also probably important to say that the perception of a really strong endorsement for Boris Johnson at this stage of the game, even though it is from the president of our most important security and military ally, is actually not desperately helpful.
Well, let's unpack that, because, Freddie, why couldn't it be a good thing? Why couldn't it be a shot in the arm to Boris Johnson?
I'm not sure it's a disaster or necessarily a great boost for him. I think, you know, Trump has said every time he's been asked about Boris Johnson that he likes him. He's said slightly different things about Corbyn at different times. But, I mean, I think there's this sort of perception that the great British public loathes Trump. And certainly there's a lot of people who really hate what he stands for. But I think there's a lot of people who probably don't talk to pollsters who are quite fond of Trump.
They talked to 5 Live. I remember when the state visit happened of Donald Trump, and we were stationed right outside Buckingham Palace, and we had on a range of guests from Conservative MPs, one of whom had been at his inauguration, through to the people behind the naked baby blimp. And when that guest came on, a lot of our listeners got in touch to say, show some respect for the office of the President of the United States, to your point.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people do respect the fact that America is our greatest ally. And I think your previous guest was right to say there is this strong slither of anti-Americanism in all the hatred of Trump. And it's disguised as Trump hatred. But actually, it's a sort of fear of this rapacious capitalist country that it actually happens to be a great ally.
Do you think he's going to play along?
I find it so touching watching him try to play along.
Touching?
Yeah.
Why?
Because one of his advisors once told me that...
That's not a word I was expecting you to say.
Well, one of his advisors once told me that, like, trying to get a message into his head before a press conference is like trying to use a sledgehammer. You just have to keep smashing it until it gets into the brain. And you could see the advisor just said, don't interfere in the election, don't comment on Corbyn. If they say the NHS, say absolutely not. And you could see he was really trying to stay on message. And I find it quite sweet. It's like watching a child try to be good.
Right, because, I mean, he did manage with the NHS to say, you know, even on a silver platter, it's not of interest. Do you believe that, Paul?
I do, to be honest. I mean, I think, well, there are two things. You know, would Donald
you just
Trump
say that as someone who was in pay to the Conservatives?
I mean, you can treat that with all the scepticism you like, but I think that there are two things. So, firstly, would Donald Trump interfere in the NHS if he could do? I.e., would he sort of raise prices for NHS patients effectively by giving greater access for American pharmaceutical companies? Mm-hmm. Maybe is the answer. But I think the truth of it is, you know, why would a Conservative administration that has a Conservative Prime Minister right now and actually wants to get re-elected do something so blindingly stupid as to try and visibly dismantle this country's single most popular institution? It's never going to happen.
I suppose the issue comes, and Freddie, say of course what you think of this, is that when we had Lord Patton on at the beginning of the programme, he was talking about the relationship between the two blondes, as it were, Prime Minister Johnson, President Trump, and he said the reason that they have there is seemingly a respect there from Mr. Trump isn't because of their hair colour. It is possibly why they can have a good personal relationship, let me clarify that, is because, as Lord Patton put it, they both have an elastic relationship with the truth.
I think there may be something in that. They have a sort of alpha male ability to try and own the moment. That's what they're all about, winning the moment. And that often means inventing their own reality. I mean, I think it's fascinating that Trump always says, I came the day before Brexit and said that it was going to happen. It was the day after. I was at that press conference. And yet
Was it?
every time, yes, it was. And every time he comes to Britain, he
Thank
says
you for
this.
debunking.
I'm debunking it live. Every time he comes to this country, he says that, and it's extraordinary. No one clearly has the guts to say to him, Mr. President, that's just not true.
Wow. So actually, do you think he has forgotten, because he obviously has a lot in his diary, or do you think he's just creating that truth, which isn't a truth, to make a neat fact of the fact he wants to say he predicted Brexit? What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think, and I don't actually mean this that critically, I think he's an egomaniac who invents his own reality. And so in his head...
So he's
getting it
creating
muddled.
a
I mean, he's
falsehood.
quite old, and he's getting it muddled because he did say a few weeks before Brexit he thinks it's going to happen. So he's getting muddled between that interview and the time he came the day after Brexit. It was the morning after.
Right.
Unless I've gone mad and I've invented
And
my
that's what he's
reality. But
conflating.
yes, I think that's what's happened.
And it'd be great to hear when you do compliment someone, if you think you're not damning them by saying he's an egomaniac. But when you say that as faint praise, tell us more.
Well, I mean, I think that Trump is obviously, the reality TV presidency, you hear a lot about that. And in his head, it's all this great story about his own success. And so part of his own success story is something like, I predicted Brexit was going to happen. It's connected to me. But I would say there is this weird sort of cosmic connection between Trump and Brexit. I mean, every time something very dramatic or interesting has happened in British politics in the last few years, he seems to appear like a sort of character on stage.
There's
Sometimes
a
it
cosmic
causes it.
connection. Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, let's just go back to the last time that there was a NATO summit. So that was in Brussels, which is its headquarters, its official headquarters in Brussels, which looks like a Bond villain's lair. And you go in, and Donald Trump had flown in, and he had essentially made a lot of noises about the possibility of America no longer being so central to the future of the alliance, which obviously is essentially existential for NATO. And in one of the closed roundtable sessions that your previous guest talked about, he essentially went round the table and told everybody, leader by leader, presidents and prime ministers, that they were doing completely insufficient things on defence. They weren't spending enough on their budget and all that sort of stuff. Having done that, there's this extraordinary press conference in which he's answering questions which are about the future of America in NATO, which is like a genuinely unthinkable thing if we all think about the importance of the alliance. Like, it's extraordinary that the US president is saying, well, at the moment, I'm paraphrasing, but the sentiment is exactly right. At the moment, there's no reason for us to withdraw from NATO, which is just like an amazing thing.
And I think it's extremely funny now that Macron... So a few years ago, everyone thought Trump was going to be the person that disrupted NATO and dismantled it. And now it seems Macron's calling it brain dead, and Trump is telling him off for calling it brain dead.
Yeah, no,
And
you
in
have to
fact,
keep up with
It's
this.
quite a Trumpy move from Macron to call it brain dead. I mean, I
Yes.
find their relationship is pretty fascinating.
That's what people have been commenting on, this kind of about turn within the alliance itself. When you were within Number 10 working for Theresa May, what was it like when Donald Trump came to town?
I mean, the guy's a force of nature. So part of it is a contained nervousness about not knowing precisely what will happen. So, when it was the same week, that last NATO summit, July 2018, I think, we all flew to Brussels, and then both Trump and Prime Minister May came back to Chequers to have that sort of series of bilateral meetings with him. At that stage, he'd done an interview with The Sun that essentially said the Brexit plan that we were working to probably wasn't what people voted for, and would destroy, I think his words, US trade. So we flew back into a storm that we didn't even know was coming. And then there's this extraordinary press conference outside where they spend an hour in the baking sun. And
Hang on, so when you were with Theresa May and he'd done that interview with The Sun, what was she doing?
so it had been done while he was in Washington, and we didn't realise that it had happened.
Right, but
until
what
it
was her response?
Well, I mean, obviously it was just another thing that we had to deal with that week.
Like sort of head in the hands moment of, right, here we go, he said this, now I've got to go and stand next to him.
I mean, not quite. It's really a kind of let's make the point and let's reinforce our argument about why what we've done actually doesn't sort of isn't detrimental to trade in the way that he thinks it is, because, as I say, it had been done probably a week before.
Yeah, but that must have been a bit annoying. I mean, you can say this now. You don't
Look,
that.
of course, genuinely frustrating moment, and it was like it was an extraordinary week. And I suppose what I'm trying to demonstrate in the telling of that is, as I say, this guy is a force of nature.
But, I mean, was Theresa May quite touched by his kind of grovelling? He did real grovelling at Chequers. I mean, I thought in a history of hilarious Trump press conferences, that was the funniest ever. But he kept sort of saying, and this magnificent woman, you know, and I didn't mean to upset her and all this sort of stuff. I mean,
women love it when we get called magnificent. It usually wins us over, hands down. No matter what else has gone on, if you call us magnificent, we're down.
I'll take note.
I mean, I suppose.
Sorry, just go on. The idea that could sort of sort out perhaps this issue he had created, but go on.
I mean, again, so, you know, that particular interview, which was really incendiary and really difficult, had been done in advance. There was then a bilateral at Chequers where sat down with the various teams and tried to explain why this perhaps wasn't quite right, or certainly why we wanted to add a different flavour to his current view. And then there was a press conference at which, he was genuinely nice.
But when one tries to add a different flavour to Donald Trump's view, how does that go down? Because we just heard from Freddie, if you're his press person trying to hammer into his head something, it's like a sledgehammer.
I think, you know, the way that without giving away any state secrets, the way that these bilateral meetings work is if there is one thing in particular that is vital as a takeaway, be that, you know, sort of views on the Iran deal or whatever, it's just a question of continuing to press it sort of throughout the meeting.
So the force of nature, as you put it then this week, Freddie, do you think he's going to hold to that line that he's been told to not intervene, or do you think we're going to get a bit more flavour from Donald Trump regarding Boris Johnson and this election and Jeremy Corbyn? In
the election, I mean, he could just get bored. I mean, I think there's always this sort of idea with Trump, particularly on things like that May visit, that he's playing sort of three-dimensional chess, and that's deliberately, you know, he'll set up a interview, cause lots of mayhem, and then try and smooth it over. Or this time he might be doing the reverse. But actually, he's often just saying whatever comes into his head. And will he manage not to say what's in his head this time? I don't know. We'll have to see.
But also he said very confidently, if Corbyn gets in, I can work with anyone.
Yeah, I think he has a genuinely friendly attitude to Britain. I don't think that's...
No, it was just what you were saying before about his other comments to do with Corbyn in the past.
He said before at a press conference with May, he said, I don't know why the guy's got... I don't know what he's got against me, I think he said. And so he was obviously aware of him, and now he was pretending he's not. But perhaps he has just forgotten who he is.
Yes, well Jeremy Corbyn has written a note, hasn't he, saying... leave our NHS alone.
I think Jeremy Corbyn thinks that Trump's visit can win him the election.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to say that. I mean,
this could be the pole shift moment.
I mean, I think Jeremy Corbyn is stuck and a bit frustrated about the polls, if they're narrowing at all, aren't narrowing as much as he would like. So he wants Trump to be the bogeyman of this election. He wants to be talking about things that Donald Trump is saying and doing, and he won't even, I suppose, be that displeased about the fact that Trump has said, not even on a silver platter, because he can just. It raises the salience of the issue.
You just got that quote, haven't you?
Yeah,
to put out
exactly.
The NHS on a silver platter.
And then what do? You say, do you believe him? The Labour supporters, I think, will be fairly sceptical of things the US president.
Freddie, have you met Trump yet as the US Spectator arm?
I have not. I've been in the same room with him a few times, but
I've
never met him.
Mr. Farage was on 5 Live earlier saying you don't get to see this personal side of him, this very charming side very often, but it's there.
I saw him in a restaurant once, and he was being very charming to everyone, so much that I didn't want to approach because I didn't want to be charmed by his magical powers. No, I think he probably is. He's obviously got charisma in abundance. But I think that this idea that he's this sort of bogeyman plotting to steal our NHS, I think it would be very depressing if that won an election for Labour.
Well, we'll see what the impact and the fallout, or if there is any. I mean, that's the thing. Will this even have an impact with the British public? That's the bigger question here. You were sort of perhaps questioning that when we began this discussion.
I think it's it's one day's news cycle. I think it will just wash over.
I mean, isn't it part of the unpredictability, really? Because we've had visits which have gone very badly, like the Chequers one, and then the final state visit, Trump was, we thought, good as gold. He was really engaged. He loved meeting the royal family. Very helpful at the press conference.
He really liked Jeremy Hunt.
He really liked Jeremy Hunt?
Really liked Jeremy Hunt to potentially be the Prime Minister as well as Boris Johnson.
Didn't quite.
I wonder if he's going to meet Mr. Hunt while he's here.
Well, he might. I mean, he is this pantomime figure. That's the thing, and it's it's the season of Christmas.
And we can't have this discussion without just bringing up, especially with your take on America, Freddie. This is a backdrop of impeachment hearings. Is this going to be seen like a bit of a holiday? Do you think?
Well, that would be the one thing that I suppose the Tories will be most worried about. Is because of impeachment. Often he tries to he will try and create a diversionary bubble by causing a dead cat, exactly. But actually, I think he's thinking at the moment impeachment's helping him because it is. It's helping with donations. It's helping rally his base. And the Democrats really don't quite know what their next move is.
I think that's an interesting insight for British listeners to hear, because they would think perhaps the opposite would be true.
Well, I think there's this sort of, if you read the headlines, it's always Donald Trump's in great trouble. He's about to be impeached. He probably will be impeached, but he won't be removed. And I think the latest polls suggest that actually impeachment is helping him in crucial swing states.
Phil says in Western-super-Mare, in response to both of your takes on this, America has been our strongest and longest ally for over 100 years. In that period, there have been leaders on both sides who were an anathema to the populations of either side. Trump is only a temporary guardian of presidentship of that great country. As we go forward, it is important that we strengthen that relationship long into the future. Just on the Corbyn side of this, if there was a potential situation, which obviously an election presents, but if there is that situation where Jeremy Corbyn wins a majority and is the Prime Minister of this country, that is the relationship that will have to be there. A great many things have been said by the shadow cabinet as well about Trump. Not least, I remember an interview I conducted with the shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry, who said if she was a younger woman as the Foreign Secretary, if she was in office, she wouldn't feel safe in a room with Donald Trump. Will his aides tell him that sort of thing? And how do you think that'll play?
I suspect it will just wash off him. I mean, he's got pretty used to being criticised. I do think there is quite a serious concern if Corbyn becomes Prime Minister about having such an obviously anti-American Prime Minister and an obviously anti-American government. I mean, that does represent a dramatic break in diplomatic relations. And I do think that's something to be a bit worried about.
And if he gets a majority, it would seem that the country agree with him. That will be the take on that. But of course, we will see with 9 days to the polls to go. Freddy Gray, editor of Spectator USA, Paul Harrison, Downing Street press secretary under Theresa May from 2017 to 2019, which included a visit from Donald Trump. So interesting to hear some frontline stuff from that. It's 11:33. Your take still coming